And I would like to pose the first question. Could you mention at least three things that Islamic Arabic philosophy has contributed with to Western civilization?
It is, I think you can mention such things, but in some sense, much of it would be very detailed. So it's it's very hard to say. I think in terms of mathematics, optics, and such, which are also the parts of philosophy that are, you could say, really stepwise. Once you find out something, then a discovery has been made. Philosophy is not about discovery. I'm just trying to explain why my answer can't be this, because I think the most important thing that happened in this tradition was that the simple idea of having a whole, you could say, higher education be based on this philosophical discussion, that was something that impressed people further north or west, or however you look at it, saying, back that or in Spain and so on, these people have this immense knowledge. We need to have it also. We desire. And it's a very tricky question why you would want to desire, because some things are practical, but they're actually only part of it. So much of it is simply, you could say, an intellectual quest. You feel suddenly much more in contact with the world, with the universe, and so on, having some knowledge of it. So, I mean, the astronomy and so on, all these technical, or we call it natural philosophy, there it's so obvious. I mean, the technical, the astrolabe that the Arabs sort of make much more functional, the mathematics, which I can't explain, but I know.
Why could you deepen the knowledge about mathematics?
Well, I know that Al-Khwarizmi, I mean, first of all, there's the question of the numbers and all that. But then again, these numbers that we use today, they call Arabic numbers, were actually Indian numbers. So it's very complicated. But the level of natural philosophy or science, you could say, it was so much higher in the Arabic world or in the Muslim world than in the West before they caught up, you could say.
Who invented the cipher?
The cipher is part of the numerical system that goes back to the Indians. So one would have to say it's an Indian system that then was used much more extensively in the Arab, in the Muslim world, and then taken to the West. From Antioch, by the way, the dotted line from Antioch to Italy. There we know actually.
So the zero is not an Arab, doesn't have an Arab origin?
No, I wouldn't say it has an Arab origin, but it's a question, because it's a question also how you indicate it. I'm not an expert on maths, but I know that you can actually do without, right? Because you can actually say 2 and then write taking in tens, 2 tens, right? So 2 and tens. So this idea about the dot, there's a whole discussion of where it goes back to exactly. But I think the problem is that very often when we want to point out these things, then we're pointing to quite specific things. And we're very often not saying, for example, that the main thing about this whole tradition, I would say, was very much the discussion it had, for example, with theology. And there you could say that the dilemmas or problems were exactly the same, and even in the late Greek tradition, and once again in the Syriac tradition, in the Arabic tradition, in the Latin tradition, that Aristotle had said that the universe is not created. And he also said that the soul, the person's soul, may probably join some kind of world soul after death. Those two, and they're not dealt with extensively, but he just says it at some point in his works. Those two came in conflict with most religions. that would claim that there was a creation of the world. And then again, there's a whole question of what does the creation of the world mean, and also that the religions would say there is an individual soul also after death. So there were these sort of discussions that then arose from all this thing. That's the kind of important, I would say, steps that again in the West was influenced from Arabic philosophy. But that's only an example. It's also the whole idea about categories, logic. How do we discuss? How do we say if this is right and this is right, then we know that this is right, and such. You say simple questions of how you deduce knowledge, and the question is whether we train with it and then know how to use it, or we just have heard of it and disregard it. That kind of deep knowledge of philosophy is I think what is the main point. And the question is whether we do it. It's not the question of whether somebody has invented it or not. It's very much a praxis. And I think the important thing that happened in the West was it was so deeply influenced by this tradition in the Arab world that it had to sort of find out. And all these people went to, especially to Spain and also in Italy, to find these census. Toledo is the most famous place probably in Spain, where there was this exchange and translations. But also a praxis. The whole question of how do we do it? As I said, most of these philosophical texts, it's not, you don't just start on the first page and say, okay, and then you read it through it. No, you stop after 5 pages probably first time, or even a half page and say, come on, I don't get any of this. Somebody help me, and so on. Which is, again, I think interesting in the context of the novel.
I just want to say, if you don't want me to record your question, just let me know. I won't turn the camera your way.
It's too late, you already recorded.
I will record, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. It's very, very interesting. It reminds me a lot of things that I read many, many, many years back. But I want to comment on Shireen's influencing whom and whom. I think that time, the people that time were not so tribalized like now. These are European, these are African, these are Arabs. People were moving wherever they could reach. People were going to study wherever they could study. Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, they all went all the way to Ethiopia to study.
Okay.
And that we have hidden that because the Western universities in Göttingen and the other decided to hide that. So these times, I think they were much, much more advanced than us in terms of trying to learn and search to learn. I mean, even in Islam, Prophet Muhammad said, we should go find a knowledge even in China. And China was so far away that time. So they didn't care, there was nothing called Greeks or Arabs or Muslims or Islam came after, of course, religion, but people were thirsty to go. There was this triangle. If you look at almost all the Greek names, gods, are also the same as Egyptians. So it was connected that time. I hope we'll go back to that, that focusing on really fighting for knowledge, fighting for understanding, not fighting for justifying our small tribes. So that's one. And the other thing is that, I used to think, many people think that compass, because compass was brought by the Arabs to Europe, but compass started in China. Just like now, we always complain the Chinese are copying and copying. We copy almost everything from China. Compass, the wheel, this trillibur you have here, this is Chinese, the money, newspapers, gunpowder, all these were invented in China. When I was in China some years back, I was just shocked, wow, I didn't know that they have all these things. So I think it's very interesting to open up and be flexible, not narrow, because these are fantastic things, but we know these are also his stories, because there are no brown people, there are no women here. So at the time, of course, there were women who are very knowledgeable, those who survived the burning of knowledgeable women, and there was many, many people of all kinds. So I think how we open that.
Yeah.
And I recommend Martin Bernard books, 3 volumes. I think maybe you know them.
Yeah.
Then there is also videos about them. So it's very, very interesting to look at those. But I think it's good that we discuss these things to see that it was like chicken and egg. Everyone was influencing by everyone, and everyone was also influenced by all other cultures. It was a yin-yang kind of thing, that kind.
There was an enormous exchange, and it's later ways of telling that have excluded the connections in many ways, and even in such, you could say, in such quite easily recognizable fields as philosophy, because it's very easy to see. But Ibn Sina is, it's a whole work on how to understand Aristotle. And yet, when writing medieval philosophy in Europe, very often this has been excluded because it's as if it's only that what is in Latin and perhaps what is in Greek that counts, and the rest is not part of the tradition or is not interesting, and either is wrong. Both is wrong. It's a question of how we're presenting things. So we simply need to start presenting things from a generalized perspective, where it's no longer somebody's possession. It's in any case strange that some people in, say, Denmark or England or France or Germany, which have been the big centers, would claim that Greek is our tradition. Well, it's down there, and it's just as close to some other people on the other side.
Of course, yeah.
Why should it be especially European, whatever was producing, or Western European, what was produced in Greece? And it wasn't. I mean, it went all ways, just as the books and other stories went in so many ways, and was shared in a sense. And that's another question also, the question of how you know that it's shared. I mean, of course you know in a sense that like the people reading, well, perhaps not but then other texts would know that they were written far away. But they wouldn't know these people. I mean, today I could just call or email or something and be in contact with people at the other end of some kind of big exchange, and know that it's there, and they okay, you think it's this and that way. In those times, it was, I mean, the big distances were hard to cover. You wouldn't know who was reading out there. You knew perhaps that somebody was reading. I mean, they all knew that there were people writing other places, and as long as they belonged to the same language, then there was a much easier communication. And of course, things written by Ibn Rushd could appear in Afghanistan. I mean, that would be easy because they had a common language when they wrote.
I have a question. I don't know how relevant it is, but like if you looking at the Arabic world and some world today, we can see, unfortunately, that we are not following up with the modern scholarship and science. Do you know when did that gap happen? When did we fail between the pages of history?
I could show an image. You probably take me time to find. When I think that this question about why Arabic philosophy or Islamic philosophy was left out of the Western tradition, there were some paintings made. There's very quite famous painting in the 14th century of the big scholastic scholar Thomas Aquinas. Heard of him? In the 13th century, big guy, and he was sanctified. So there was made sort of a portrait of him when he was in all his sort of glory or whatever. And then he was painted with two men on each side. So Plato on one side and Aristotle on the other side. So he was in good company, you could say. So there's this image of him to say, this is our big philosopher, right? And then there's a guy lying down on the floor, also on the same image. Right? Big image. And that's Ibn Rushd. That's Averroes. And you think, well, that's wrong. I mean, why should he be lying? He should be standing just next to the two other guys, all for they're sort of on an equal level, because they are actually. He was very dependent on him. I mean, he used him all the time. So why should he be lying down on the floor? Well, that's of course because of some kind of polemic attitude that was put into this image, and I see there's no reason for it. There's another very famous. You've seen it. I should I don't know. There's a very famous image called the School of Athens. It's painted by Raffaello, sort of Renaissance image. Has two vaults, and then a bigger vault here, and then there are two guys walking in the middle. That's Plato and Aristotle talking to each other, and then there are all these other guys, a few women perhaps, and that's all the other philosophers. So lots of ancient philosophers, but also later philosophers, and there's also at least one Arabic philosopher. So Raffaello, he's a sort of an example of I would say, the right attitude. I mean, you just paint all these together, and they belong to the same world. Whereas this other image of Thomas Aquinas is the kind of polemical that I'm afraid won then more. And it comes, 13th, 14th century there you have. And of course, they were painted at some period of conflict and war and all this stuff, and then you invent polemics, and then you retell the story to make, some are heroes and some are the baddies.
How was he lying on the floor? How?
Well, he's just lying flat on his stomach, I think.
Because it could be interpreted as he's the fundament.
It could. I wouldn't. We should look at the image then, but I wouldn't say he's not. He's not sort of crushed. He's actually taking his head up, but it is a negative. I mean, he should be standing up next to the others. That's his natural place. And the funny thing is, why include him at all? I mean, why not just say, okay, if you want Plato and Aristotle standing there, then that's fine. But you want some kind of. It has also been shown that when people started writing. The history of philosophy, which is not an old thing. In the old time, in medieval time, they didn't write histories of philosophy. They only wrote on the philosophical themes, or they would write perhaps like short biographies of philosophers. But they wouldn't write sort of saying, first of all, these guys, and then this and this. And that started 16th, 17th century. And there you see that the Arabic tradition is pushed out. Is not included, and it's simply it's making a completely artificial division, saying we won't talk about these. I mean, they were so important at some point, and at that point there was still texts by Arabic philosophers used in schools, like Ibn Sina's medical works were used in universities that used Latin as the language, so in Latin translation. Up until at least 17th century. So they were used, and then you still excluded them when writing history. So it's a complicated story, but it has to do, I think, with around the Renaissance, late medieval times, Renaissance. At that point, that started. Also because philosophers normally would simply say, I don't care about his life, his books are good. I mean, that's...
It's a question to the book.
Yeah.
It's just because you talked about it was a critic of the society.
Yeah.
And I was interested to hear more about it, because you said that this Hayy, he was like the answer of why the society didn't work. But I think it's like a circle, because men also came from nothing and they built the society. Would he not also do the same if he was like starting from, if he was starting from nature and, people were gathering more and more, and then it will end at the same thing?
Yeah, that's a question. Well, I mean, Tufayls doesn't show us how to build a society, I'm afraid. I mean, that's not part of this text. And you could claim that one of the problems he finds with the people that he is talking to is very much this, that they are stuck in fixed ways of understanding or following a traditional... There is a criticism of, you could say, taqlid, of some kind of, being too fixed to...
Okay, so he thought that maybe that they needed to, like, reset in some way, or...
Yeah, he definitely thinks so.
Okay,
but it's not... it's not... He doesn't produce any kind of... I mean, the two of them go back to the island. I don't know how much of a society that is. It's more like two friends.
But what was the critic? Like, just that people were fixed and the development stopped, or?
Yeah, they insisted more on having their fights disagreeing than trying to reach a common understanding, full understanding.
Actually, I was also thinking the same thing about when Hayy meets this guy and he's, what's his name?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's introduced to this community who's very, as you said, fixed in the way they do things and dogma, and then Hayy is so confused by this and runs away. Then my question is it a commentary on mystics being marginalized in history or throughout history?
It's a good question because, well, I think first of all, you see that in, I don't know whether you see that in Japan, but it is a common theme that philosophers feel lonely. They feel left on their own with their knowledge, and society has either no interest in it or an interest in it that it should be abolished, that it should go away. So that is a common theme, you could say, in much medieval philosophy, sort of pessimistic, you could say, also to some degree, which is perhaps also why I mentioned this sadness. And then there's a question of how much of a mystic that Hayy is, and he clearly is, but it is there's a sort of full program, and it doesn't really appear that that's the problematic part. It's I wouldn't say in the text. But it could definitely be a part of the intended feeling that the author, that the reader should have. But that is also part of it. Yeah, but it's hard. You could read it that way. You could certainly read it that way. Yeah.
No, I just want to, this is just my insight regarding Tariq's question about how and why suddenly the Arab connection disappeared. And I think this is, as you said, is part of the Renaissance, which was actually at the same time was the darkest period of the idea of colonizing the world. Because if you want to go and colonize other people, you have to make sure that these people are stupid, these people are actually not educated. We need to go and help them. And because human beings, I think we can't just go and do bad things without finding justification. We cannot just say we are going to do it because we need the money or we need oil, but we are going to do this because we need to democratize these guys, we need to bring civilization and so on. I think that's how the Arab connection or that connection from that world got lost. And also, especially the elites from the Arab world, especially from Egypt, including Taha Hussein, when they went to France and they went all over, and also the young Turks, they internalized this nationalism. They, instead of seeing themselves as human beings, they saw themselves as nationalist Turks or Egyptians or Arabs and things, and the whole thing got confused, you know. So that's why actually I miss this old time where people were fighting more about ideas and knowledge, not about ethnicity and nationalism, as we are dealing now. So I think part of that missing link, that gap was created, and we are still suffering from that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's part of another theory I also work with. But I think that the empires have always existed, and the important change happened around the Renaissance or that period. That empires were suddenly constructed across sea. That, well, Denmark also to some extent, but especially France, England, Spain, and so on, constructed empires that were across sea. So it's so easy to say, well, we are here, and these are the people that we've, well, conquered or ruling over now, but they're different. Even though, I mean, some parts were then, in a sense, quite close, or the sea wasn't that big to get to that part. But this whole notion of empires constructed over sea is, I think, a very important and sad aspect of modern empires. Old-time empires were normally not. They didn't have this question about race and they had other things like well, top and bottom of society and so on. That was very important, but not race and not. The idea was that these people next, those living just outside our borders, well, we kind of know they are people, right? They're not. It's not another race or kind. But then going overseas, you lose sort of where you came from, and you also find yourself suddenly in a completely different world, and it's harder, or it was at least hard, I'm afraid, for these people to find it a unified world. So, yeah. No, but it's strange because then at some point it's so obvious that things are, like, I mean, the Chinese inventions, and so that part has somehow been incorporated into our general knowledge without any real problem. It's as if, okay, they invented the compass, even printing and so on, and all these stories, that can be accepted from a general Western view and has been accepted for centuries. But that philosophy was shared with all these other parts of the world has had a much harder time finding a place in the normal way of describing things. And
is it maybe because they were more superior to Arab in some way before?
Yeah, it is a slight problem that was a clear inferior complex for a long time.
So we should have been dumb, then we maybe had today.
I would never recommend being dumb, so I don't think that's the solution. I would rather recommend being, simply admiring things well done at some place. Why not?
Interesting. I was in Granada some years back with an Egyptian friend who was a professor. And then we were looking at, how this architecture, were reflecting in the water and how fine it is. He said, deep down, I don't believe it's the Arabs who built this, because if you look at Cairo, how dirty it is now, So anyway, this is good to reflect on all these things.
Beautiful things, and there's beautiful things in most places.
But that time, then I told him actually, that time in Oxford, they were teaching that taking shower is dangerous, because you got ill of it. You shouldn't take shower, you should avoid water at home.
There have been many theories in that.
Other questions?
I have a question regarding the book. Is it going to be taught in school?
That's the idea. We write a book that follows exactly the requirements for especially philosophy in high school and gymnasium. So that every quotation has to be between 1.5 pages and 4 pages exactly, because then it can be used as a basic text, as a text example. And then all texts are given an introduction, so it can be used in oldtidskundskab, ancient civilization, as an actual, where did Plato and Aristotle and all that thing, where did it go and what kind of tradition is that? So we hope that it will be used in that, in those classes also, and then perhaps even in HF has this technology history, so we're producing one chapter that will be suitable for that also. So it is a school book, and then of course it could probably be used for. I mean, lots of people we hope could want to read it simply because it is an introduction, and there's no such. Even in any other language, we've really searched. Try to find something similar in English or French or German and so on. And there are introductions, and most of them are hard to read, but there is one by Rudolf in German. I think that's a fairly good introduction, but it's not a school text or can't be used by, and it doesn't serve examples. We take examples, so we're taking examples, of course, from this story. We even have 4 text samples of that, but then from other places where we find texts that are, I should mention that, by the way, there's these Brethren of Purity, how is it, so Brothers of Purity is a sort of pseudonym for a group of philosophical writers end of 10th century. And they have this one epistle, 22 I think it is, where it's a discussion between a representative of mankind and first one representative of all animals, but then they also speak each of them. So the cow and the ass and the monkey and so on, they also have all animals are complaining about the behavior of mankind, right? They treat us badly, come on. And then there's this king who has to somehow reach a conclusion of how to deal with this conflict. But it's a great text also, so we're also taking from there, but not also from sort of more technical things where more introduction is, or more exact introduction is needed, and of course it would to make it possible for children or young people in high school to read it, they would need a teacher helping also maybe perhaps.
There's one. Sorry, you're going.
My question is just related to that. I was wondering if you use some time or develop some teaching material that also kind of deconstruct the history and addresses the Orientalist discourses that has helped to kind of hide this wonderful evolution of science and technology and philosophy in the East.
Well, I mean, do it certainly in the basic way that we simply tell the story without disregarding this whole tradition. I don't know how much we sort of really confront the Orientalist problem, which is obviously there. It is a problem, but you could also end up sort of making the text look like a defense against a certain kind of criticism, which I find strange. But we would more like to simply be an attempt to really produce a substantial, even-minded presentation of this, making it simply available. I think really the problem that some people will say, oh, the Arabs taught us, which means then probably Western Europe, everything, or all the other view, that tradition has had no influence at all. The thing that you have these extreme views is simply based on the simple fact that you can't go and read anything of this very easily. Well, you can look on Wikipedia and so on, but you're soon lost if you don't know, get some kind of help with an overview. So we have a first chapter, which is a chapter which we don't know how many of those in high school will read, because it's full of information and so on, and it has no text that can be used for their exam. But it can be read by the teacher, it can be read by the students who want to, and it can of course be read by anybody who will buy the book at some point. By the way, the book will both be a physical book and an e-book, because many gymnasia will only use one chapter, right? They buy one chapter for this class this year, and that requires a special way of writing it. But yeah, it's the problem also with fighting Orientalist view is that then you start that discussion up first, right? And that's not the first discussion I would want. The first discussion I would want is, we have this lovely shared tradition of philosophy, other things also, but now this, let's have a look at it. Let's simply deal with it. I mean, in the natural way that you would read any, French or whatever philosophy. Let's have a go with Ibn Sina, Ibn Tufayls, and see where it takes us. So, yeah.
No, I absolutely understand. It's a difficult field, but at the same time, I see the danger of just continuing the same story, because that we know that things were narrated from very narrow perspective, and if we continue that, it's a bit dangerous. So one way is to look at all the Greek. Actually, they say all the Greek texts were much more objective. They were much more representing, the whole area there, including Egypt, Mesopotamia, and things, because the people, as I said, all the Greek philosophers, all the big guys, they went not only to Egypt, but they went all the way to Ethiopia to study. That's documented. So to look at, try to just point that there are some possibilities also to go deeper for those who are interested.
Sure, and I mean there are other people, and I hope there will also be other people writing books for high school and so on the influence of neighboring cultures into this Greek culture, which has been highlighted so much. And by the way, I mean there is a problem in general that when we go back, there will be certain areas that are of more interest than certain other areas, just as they may be today, from a personal or cultural perspective. So if we go back to ancient times or medieval times, it's hard to include, you know, it's very impolite to mention anybody, but if I say, you know, South America, then it's hard to make a connection, right? Because there was no connection. So there is a difference. And for example, if we're talking about texts that were written, you could draw a circle in the year 1000, you could draw a circle, and that circle would go, yeah, well, there are Mayans in Mexico, right? And then there's Iceland, and then there's a big circle, and you can go take it all the way to Japan or something. And then there are areas outside that circle where you have no writing. It's simply a fact. I mean, well, you may have had some writing, but it has not survived, or it has only been for certain purposes that were less, you can say, extensive than the kind of writing we know within that area. And so we can't make everybody equal in terms of when going back saying that everybody, I mean, I'm not saying, well, equal of course in terms of being a human being, but not equal in the sense of what can we find that we can read, for example. And reading is quite a big part of schools, so or even ways of knowing how people thought. So there's a problem there, but the strange thing in that is that the Western tradition has insisted, oh no, the area is much smaller. It's only within this area that anything of interest happens. But there is a difference, and that's also why, speaking philosophy, you would have to say that Greece had quite, or Greece is a wrong way to say it. Greek philosophers, they were living in a much wider area than Greece today. But Greek philosophers, they had a big influence. We have to acknowledge. And so, okay, that part of the world has produced something quite important for that field. Then other parts have produced other things in other fields. But yeah, so there's a kind of diplomacy there needed. We're all speaking to each other now. It's a great thing, and it continues to change our way of talking about things, which is a good thing also. I remember when I taught in high school. I've also taught in high school, and I sometimes think that I'm regretting that I didn't continue there, and that's why I'm writing books now for high school, because then I am at least connected somehow to it. And there I had the special situation that I was teaching at what was called Gymnasium, now it's Gymnasium, and my class was incredibly mixed in terms of where people's origin was. Family-wise, but even personally, some of them had only been living in Denmark for not their whole lives at least. So this we that I was used sort of back home or whatever, I don't know where, I would say we, and then suddenly I think, okay, we, by that I mean Danes, or I mean something, that we didn't cover really any ground, or at least when it did, I really liked using that we. I mean, saying, okay, that's we, that's really we. Or if not, then saying, okay, it's perhaps Denmark, or it's, Copenhagen, or whatever. I mean, some kind of more restricted place in the world. And that is really important. That we use. I also used it when I spoke. I correct myself, and so it's so difficult. It's really difficult because we are nevertheless, even though we are talking. We are nevertheless somehow more connected to certain areas or parts of the world than others, and so on. So, but we're all talking to each other. That's a really big step.
Can you hold that for a second? I wanted it to be over there in the whole lecture, but Jakob said it couldn't. Yeah, well, thank you for enlightening us. And thank you for and epistemology. I used to study philosophy at Copenhagen University, and we did not have any kind of introduction to Arab philosophy. So to me, it really was a missing link. So I'm really happy that you are writing a book for high schools, and I know that we also have books now on Arab philosophy and Islamic philosophy at the university by Saad, I think. Yes. So I think that's what we can do instead of challenging these narratives on the lack or the missing link of Arab Islamic philosophy in the Western educational system. We can create that change by placing ourselves on the knowledge production and producing that literature. And that is in itself a response, a very substantial response or way to challenge. Thank you so much, Christian. And we have these flowers for you here, and the 2 books that I gave you earlier. Thank you so much. And the next Islamic Academy will be in January, and we have a seminar coming up on Sharia, Islamic law, and we will also have a seminar on Islamic human rights. So, yes? 16. November? Yeah. Yes, and even though this has nothing to do with religion today, I was told to tell you that the next Friday prayer is on the 16th of November. So please, all the women in here, please join us on the 16th of November. And thank you so much, Christian. Thank you.